From the mid-20th century, during a time of challenges and hopeful rebuilding, from an alliance of shared passion, Rex was born, persevering through decades, sustained by faith, emboldened by vision. Rex has become a tradition of service to the nation. With its first publications, Rex pledged itself to a more proactive role in education. As evolving education required new tools and services, so did Rex expand. In the dawn of the 21st century, when education is demanded to foster learning in all forms, learning within and beyond the walls of institutions, for sustaining today for the future. We are championing education. We are now Rex Education.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Edukampyon second webinar series brought to you through a partnership between Rex Education and the Ateneo SALT Institute, or the Ateneo de Manila Institute for the Science and Art of Learning and Teaching, and the Ateneo Teacher Center. This is the 10th of our 12 webinar series. If you've been following the past few webinars, welcome back. If you're new to the webinars, then welcome, and I hope that today becomes a fruitful session for you. My name is Galvin Ngo. I'm the Assistant Director for the Ateneo SALT Institute, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Let me first introduce to you the SALT Institute and the Ateneo Teacher Center. The Ateneo SALT Institute seeks to promote innovations in learning and teaching, especially those that help address the challenges the nation faces in education. The Ateneo Teacher Center, on the other hand, is the Teacher Training and Professional Development Center of SALT. It has offered summer Turo Guro seminar workshops for basic education teachers for several years. And recently, it launched a radio show called Radyo Turo Guro for teachers. In the radio show, we discuss teaching strategies in English, math, Filipino, science, and other education matters every weekday evening. So if you'd like to catch that, you can follow the Ateneo SALT Institute Facebook page where we announce the schedule. We're very happy to partner with Rex Education in bringing this webinar series to you. Edukampyon is Rex Education's ongoing initiative for the promotion of the Filipino whole learner. Edukampyon engages and empowers education duty bearers that they may better respect, protect, and fulfill every Filipino learner's right to quality education. This second Edukampyon webinar series is on learner agency and is designed to build capacities for making our learners champions of their own learning. In this webinar series, we define student agency or learner agency as having the power to act. Students should first be able to believe in themselves. They should believe that they can achieve whatever their dreams and goals are with hard work and persistence, especially in an environment of respect and trust among teachers and students. They must also actually take the steps to make the dream come true. They must actually have the will and the intention to pursue their dreams. In the past few webinars, we have focused on the third component of developing agency in our students, that of equipping them so that they have the necessary skills to achieve their goals. Our past speakers have explained how students can use rubrics to be clear about the learning targets and to progress towards them, how students must be aware of their beliefs about learning because these greatly impact their academic work, and how inquiry activities and PBL are the types of activities in which students can really practice and develop learner agency. Last week, Mrs. Rita Atienza talked about the critical role of scaffolding and explicit teaching so that we can gradually let go until students can do their work independently. This week, we have Mrs. Atienza back, who will be our speaker again. But this time, she will talk about how all our efforts to develop agency may be futile if we do not first attend to shaping our classroom and school culture. So our speaker for this morning is the director of the Ateneo Teacher Center. She's also the coordinator for professional development of the Ateneo SALT Institute, and she's an assistant professor of the education department. She's also a curriculum consultant to Assumption College, San Lorenzo, and Xavier School, and has co-authored the book Learning by Refraction with Father Johnny Go. So please join me in virtually welcoming Mrs. Rita Atienza. Good morning, Ms. Rita.
Hi, good morning, Galvin, and good morning to the audience. I'm happy to be your learner agency. In fact, you will find a lot of things that I mentioned in today's webinar familiar, because in a way, I'm going to bring together a lot of what has been said in the past webinars. In the series, we have so far been talking about what agency is, when students have agency, and different ways that teachers can develop learner agency. We have been very focused on agency as being carried out or developed in the students through the teacher's actions and in the relationship between teacher and student. Today, we're going to zoom out and start talking about the kind of learning environment in both the classroom and in the school that we need to have for agency to thrive. So it's about the general environment, and of course, it's about culture. So this for me is very important, because no strategy or approach will work if the classroom and or the school culture is not conducive to developing agency. So I changed the title of our webinar a little bit to stress the importance of this. So for this slide deck, you can see the title that I put here is Building a Culture of Learner Agency, just to focus on, or just to signal that we're focusing on culture in the webinar today. So it's building a culture of learner agency, why and how, and the 10 what I call language hacks will be a bonus at the end, towards the end of the webinar. So we're still going to use language, but we will first situate the talk on culture. So our agenda for this morning is to first focus on school culture. I'd like to spend a lot of time on this. For those of you who are new to your school or do not feel you can influence school culture enough, then at least think about the culture in your own classroom. But if you're a veteran teacher or you're a school administrator, then think about both classroom and school culture. Okay. Note that a classroom culture of agency that is not supported by a school culture of agency will, of course, not be as effective by one that is. Nevertheless, as we start this webinar by talking about culture, think of whichever one you are in a position to influence, classroom and or school culture. Okay, so here's our agenda for today. I'll start by telling you a story about related to both classroom and school culture. And then I'll give you a framework with which to start concretizing how you will develop culture in your classroom or school. The talk, as I said, will also be a synthesis of past concepts you've heard in this webinar series. And we'll put it all together now vis-a-vis that framework and talk about how you can build a culture of agency in the school. And then lastly, I will position the language hacks or the language of agency as one easy entry point for you. Okay, so let's start with what is culture. And instead of giving you a mini lecture about what culture is, I would like to instead explain this to you by telling you a story. So this is the story of how a school built and shaped a culture that exemplifies its values. It is also a mini case study because we will analyze what elements help them build this culture, and a mini book study because I'm going to really show you excerpts from the book, An Ethic of Excellence. The book is written by Ron Berger, and you see his picture here. He's an elementary classroom teacher for the past 43 years. He teaches in a system of public schools who are part of the Expeditionary Learning Network of Schools. So they banded together and they are espousing a teaching approach called expeditionary learning. So today we will explore what culture is and how important it is by hearing some parts of his story. I'd like to emphasize before I go on that school and classroom culture is very, very important, and it is something we do not pay attention to enough, even if it is the foundation on which we build our work of education. And not paying attention to culture is like the proverbial building a house on sand. So I hope I can get across this very, very important message, especially in the first part of this talk. Culture matters. So let's start. Ron Berger says Ron Berger's hobby is carpentry. So he is primarily a school teacher, but he loves working with his hands and doing DIY work, carpentry. Marami ako nakikitang mga Facebook posts now about do-it-yourself carpentry. Okay, so he says, in carpentry, there is no higher compliment builders give to each other than this: that guy is a craftsman. This one word says it all. It connotes someone who has integrity and knowledge, who is dedicated to his work and who is proud of what he does and who he is. Someone who thinks carefully and does things well. So Ron Berger focused on the word craftsmanship. I'm going to teach my students that whatever work they do, it will show great craftsmanship. Here, in this excerpt, Berger explains what kind of culture they're trying to build in their school. They have chosen to focus on building a culture not of agency, so we won't talk yet about agency. In their school, they're building a culture of excellence. Okay, so that is their value, excellence. They feel this best encapsulates what value they would most like their students to learn, what value is most valuable to their students in the real world. And they have chosen excellence. And Ron Berger in his classroom has further concretized it to craftsmanship. So in this paragraph, he defines what excellence is, and it is very clear to him. He uses an analogy, that of a craftsman. Think of someone who they say is a master craftsman in woodworking, o madami dyan sa Pampanga, di ba? Or sa Ifugao, the Ifugao woodworking. You know? They're master craftsmen in woodworking, or in making guitars or watches. And if you've heard about how much those Rolex watches cost, it's because of the craftsmanship that goes into it. So the word means artistry, painstaking practice, mastery of the craft, passion. And on the right is a picture of the book in which he wrote a dedication to me in calligraphy, because his passion is craftsmanship, doesn't just do things haphazardly. So he was chatting with me and getting to know me while he produced a beautifully calligraphed dedication. So his mind's very clear. Everything the students give to me, a math homework, a short paragraph, a poster, it must show craftsmanship. He explains that he has imbued this value in the culture. He did not just tell them to be excellent or stick excellence as a criterion in his rubric. First, he expected it of all his students, and he committed to developing it in each and every one of his students. He says, In my classroom, I have students who come from homes full of books and students whose families own almost no books at all. I have students for whom reading, writing, and math come easily, and students whose brains cannot follow a line of text without reversing words and letters. So he has dyslexic students. Students who can't line up numbers correctly on a page. So he's had students with dyscalculia, I think is the name. I have students whose lives are generally easy and students with physical disabilities and health or family problems that make life a struggle. So it's clear to him, I'm going to teach craftsmanship to all of my students. I want them all to be craftsmen, he says. Some may take a little longer to produce things. Some may need to use extra strategies and resources. In the end, they need to be proud of their work, and their work needs to be worthy of pride. So I'm going to ask you to think in a while, start reflecting, right? But let me go on first. So he speaks of an activity that his class had with another school. This was an activity with a school for the deaf. And he says that while they were having this activity with this other school, he could feel that culture of excellence. He says that culture is something you can feel in the air, in the behavior of people, in their actions. It is something that we feel, very palpable, aura, vibes, halatang halata siya, right? So you can imagine, I've entered stores where I'm having a hard time and there are sales girls just standing around and nobody's helping me. So ano yung kultura na feel ko doon, right? Versus a store or an office where everyone is walking briskly. There's no lazing around. Everyone has something to do. Everyone seems happily going about their business. Iba ang kultura noon. Nababasa ang kultura ng isang lugar, ng isang organization, right? And he says it, let me read it to you because he says it so beautifully. There was a spirit, an ethic in the air that day. It was partly about the kids, the teaching, the curriculum, the school conditions, the community, but more importantly, it was about all of these things at once. It transcended these things. It was the culture of the school that encouraged these kids to volunteer, to work together, to care deeply about the quality of what they did. It was the ethic that the school culture instilled. And he goes on to say, how do you share a culture? How do you share an ethic? So he's going so far as to say the culture is an ethic. Perhaps he's inferring that people are so committed to building this certain type of culture that it is almost a moral obligation for them. That's how passionate they feel about it. So a short reflection, and I'll be pausing regularly throughout this webinar for you to think about your own practice, your own beliefs, okay? And I'll bring it to classroom, and my prompt to you is, what story does your classroom tell? Okay, and as usual, the same way we did last week, I will pause for 10 seconds and allow you to think about it. So it might be, for those that weren't here last week, it might be an awkward silence, but I feel it's very important to give our students time to think. Of course, in a lesson, it won't be only 10 seconds, but for this webinar, at least 10 seconds, right? So when somebody walks into your classroom, what is that feeling? Ano yung vibes na ano yung kwento? What story does your classroom tell? And I'll add now a further question. So in this story, does your classroom have an ethic, right? And let me explain this a little further. In our Radio Turo Guro show, I am the host for the math show every Tuesday night, konting advertisement at 6 p.m. We guested a kindergarten teacher shout out to teacher lovely Jane Apole, an outstanding kindergarten teacher in Bohol. She was actually given that award. And she was explaining that she wants her classroom. It's very clear to her. Her classroom is not just a classroom, it's a class home. And it's so clear to her that her students who are even in grade 12 still come back to their class home to visit her. A lot of them. It's almost an ethic to her. What about you? Does your classroom have an ethic? 10 seconds. So he said, how do you share a culture, an ethic? Okay, we're back to Ron Berger. And he says, establishing an ethic, it's not a quick fix. It's a long-term commitment. It's a way of life. The key to excellence, and I put excellence in with an underlined, I underlined excellence because, for me, it's like fill in the blanks. It could be the key to agency, the key to whatever culture you want, right? Service, a service culture, a kindness culture, okay? So the key to excellence is this. It is born from a culture, which means once those children enter a culture with a powerful ethic, that ethic becomes their norm. It's what they know. To build a new culture, a new ethic, you need to begin somewhere. You need a focal point, a vision to guide the direction for reform, a passion for beautiful student work, and develops conditions that make this work possible. So for him, his starting point, he said, what is my starting point? And today I'm proposing that it for you be certain language that you use, okay? But we'll get to that at the end of the webinar. But for him, he said, how can I start? Where will I start? It's going to be a lifetime commitment, but where will I start building this culture of excellence? And he said, it is going to be, they have to produce beautiful student work. As much as possible, all their work will be crafted. Remember that word, crafted well and excellently to the extent possible. Okay? And he says, after students have had a taste for excellence, they're never quite satisfied with less. They're always hungry. And he has students, he says, who are now 40-something years old or 50-something years old that go back to him and tell him, Mr. Berger, I still use the calligraphy. And you know what, Mr. Berger? I always try to think about, is the work I produce very excellently done? So it's something that never leaves them, okay? So here's an example of how they do it in their school. This is the story of Austin, a grade 1 boy, this way back in 2002. And the work was a science class. This was a science class, and the work, they were taking butterflies. And one piece of work in that whole unit was to make a scientific drawing of a swallowtail butterfly. And this is the work that Austin produced. Now think, for many of us, if you're a grade 1 teacher, you're going to say, oh, konti lang erasure. Tsaka butterfly naman siya. Proportional pa yung wings, no? 10 out of 10 and move on. But the work that you gave them was make a scientific drawing of a swallowtail butterfly. Makikita ba dito na swallowtail butterfly siya? Scientific drawing ba to? Okay siya pang grade 1, pero hindi siya scientific drawing, di ba? So this is not enough for Ron Berger, okay? So in their school, they decided to go into a process of feedback and critique, right? So he told the grade 1 class, the teachers told the grade 1 class, give each other feedback. Only feedback, 2 things, scaffolded. Remember what we talked about last week? So only 2 things, the shape of the wings, and then later on, the pattern. But let's start with shape. Just talk about what is your feedback with respect to the shape. Now you try it, right? So the shape is, of course, one wing is not so low. It should be a little longer. So they did give feedback. And here is the second drawing of Austin. And you see, this is already much better, but they continued to give feedback. And I remember this video. Please check it out online. It's worth checking. It's worth viewing. And the boy was saying, yes, but it's too much like a triangle. The wings, it's too sharp. And, so I guess Austin tried, and it sort of messed up his drawing. So if you look at number 3, he tried to round the wings a little, but he wasn't able to do it. So they gave him more feedback. And look at his number 4 drawing. Look at his number 4 drawing. And he's been able to make it more like a triangle, but not so straight as if you used a ruler in drawing the triangle. It's approaching. It's beautiful work now. And so they went to pattern. And so you can see there, they have a rubric, and then he started to draw in the pattern. And this is his final work. And this is what a grade 1 boy was able to do, because culture of excellence was one of the things they were really working on. And Mr. Ron Berger, chose to do it via beautiful student work. It's not, beautiful doesn't mean only artwork, but beautiful means done well, done with passion, done with mastery. Okay, so he goes thinking that projects or critique or portfolios, and what he's talking about here is strategies. Okay, so you take so many webinars, and one is about project-based learning, one is about how to give feedback or critique, one is about a new way of assessing, right? So he's saying that thinking that these strategies that you learn about are a magic solution to anything is as silly as thinking high-stakes testing will turn schools around. Only as part of a strong classroom culture or school culture are these tools valuable. And he ends, culture matters. So let me just pause here and allow you to make that sink in. Okay, so what does that mean to you as an educator, whether you've paid attention to it or not? What does it mean to you at this moment? What does that phrase, culture matters, mean to you? So let me pause for just 5 seconds this time. Okay, so we go on, and now I'd like to give you a framework for starting to think about culture. And the framework I'll give you will be Ron Richards' 8 cultural forces. At the same time that I'm talking to you about each of the 8 cultural forces, I'll tell you again another story about another school, a school that I visited together with Sir Galvin. I don't know if he remembers, but we were together in that trip to visit this school. And that school really is building a culture of agency. That's one of the values that they're instilling in their students, right? So as I talk about the 8 cultural forces as a framework for you to use so that you are more systematically building culture, I'm going to intersperse it with the story of that school as they build culture of agency. And that will also be, in a way, a review of all our past webinars. So it's like a synthesis also. Okay, sorry. Right. So remember what Ron Berger said. It's not the strategies that you're learning about. Those alone won't turn your school around. Only as part of a strong classroom culture or school culture are these tools, are these strategies valuable. Remember, I said it's like building a proverbial house on sand. So you can keep building your mansion, your beautiful house with strategies and everything. But if your foundation is sand, it won't work. Therefore, culture matters. So this is the book where you will find the 8 cultural forces uh, that help build culture. But it's a book about a culture of thinking. So this is primarily a book about culture of thinking, but I'm borrowing the 8 forces for today to talk about building a culture of agency. Right. So in this book, Richard says, culture is the hidden tool. So this is the same as Burger, right? If I'll read it to you and you'll see it's exactly the same as the statement of Ron Burger that we just finished with 2 or 3 slides before this. Culture is the hidden tool for transforming our schools and offering our students the best learning possible. He says, traditionally, policymakers have focused on curriculum as the tool for transformation, naively assuming that if you change the curriculum, right, we keep changing our curriculum, right, and we keep learning about all sorts of strategies, and we're hoping it will transform education. In reality, curriculum is something that is enacted with students. It's carried out with the students. It's something you make curriculum happen in the school with the students. And you don't do that in a vacuum. You need culture so that that curriculum is carried out. So he goes and says it plays out within the dynamics of the school and classroom culture. It's the stage, right? So ano yung stage ninyo? You're enacting a play, the play's curriculum. What's the stage set? Is the stage clean? What is the stage? Does the stage allow the audience to really see what's going on in the play? So it's very visible. So culture is the stage, it's the foundation. And he says it here, I'll continue reading. Thus, culture is foundational. It will determine how any culture comes to life. Now, Richard works very closely with Mark Church, and in a mini course I attended last 2017 with Mark Church, he says very clearly, the culture is my co-teacher. Imagine that. The culture teaches the students just as much as you do. In fact, maybe more, right? So the culture is my co-teacher. In the picture on the left-hand side, you see, a door. This is actually a door in the classroom. And the teacher posted all the pictures of the students doing things with each other related to the unit that they're currently doing. And I'll zoom in on this picture a little later. So this classroom is full of student work all over the walls. Contrast it with the other classroom where the students just go, none of their work is posted, it's a very dry environment, and it's like learning is just a time when you come in here and you go out when the bell rings. And so, what is that teaching your students about culture? So culture is my co-teacher. So again, we pause here and I'll ask you 2 questions and give you 10 seconds to think about it, right? So I asked you earlier, what story does your classroom tell, right? But I'm going to ask you now 2 questions related to it, okay? Did your students get the memo? Pretend na lang na ang memo mo is, dapat ganito ang learning. Dapat masaya siya. Dapat collaborative siya, di ba? Ganyan. Dapat you learn from each other. Yun ang gusto mong sanang kultura, di ba? And you want the students, it's like if you could issue a memo so that the students would do it, right? How will your students get your memo? How will they know na yun ang talagang gusto mo, right? So, 10 seconds. And Richard tells us that there are 8 ways that your students can get that memo, can really get it. Of course, I'm not referring to a literal memo, because you can give that memo, the students won't read it, they won't understand it, they won't follow it. So Richard says, to get that memo, there are 8 factors, 8 forces that you have to work on: expectations, environment, time, opportunities, interactions, routines, modeling, and language. So I'll just go quickly through each one. And as examples, I'll tell you a story about that school that Sir Galvin and I visited. Okay. So the first one is expectations. And usually when we think of expectations, we think of these are our expectations of students. You have to be silent in class. You cannot talk at the same time. I expect you to be well behaved. I expect you to give your work on time. I expect you to study hard. And it comes across as directives and orders because there are expectations of the students. So that is not what we mean by the kind of expectation that builds culture. We're instead talking about expectations for students. And Ron Richard defines it as the internal compass with which we operate based on our beliefs about our students and the nature of teaching. Okay, so in agency, to build agency, you have to expect, your expectation for this student is malayong mararating ng estudyante na to, diba? Or ang gulo-gulo, ang likot talaga ng estudyante na to, nakaka-high blood. Pero napaka-creative niya, malayo ang mararating ng estudyanteng ito. So, is that your expectation for your students? Malayo ang mararating nila? Okay, that's expectations. The next cultural force is environment. And it's about the physical environment, because this physical environment conveys the values of that school and gives key messages, even in the absence of its inhabitants. So this is about if somebody were to enter your classroom and nothing's happening there, the students are not there. Let's say it's a Saturday. Let's say it's still in-person instruction, and it's a Saturday, nobody's there, and a visitor enters your classroom. What will that person see, right? So the physical environment of a school or classroom will influence how individuals interact, their behaviors, and their performance. It can inhibit or inspire the work of the group and the individual. So here is a picture. These are all my pictures. So they're very amateurish. But there's this big pole in the middle of actually it's near the entrance of their school. This is the Catherine Smith Elementary School. And this trip was way back in 2017. But this school continues to improve. I looked them up, and they continue this culture up to now, right? So it's a culture of agency that they're trying to build. And this pole, I tried to zoom it in here, and you can see on top it says Harvard, and that's the top one. The next one is Cornell, right? This is a school of high poverty, and in the US, many schools, many children don't reach college, right? So they drop out before then, or they have no money to go to college, so they just join the workforce. So in this school, the culture is, they have this mantra, we are college bound. And so this pole has all the universities and big colleges in the US written on it. The administrators and faculty have made very clear to the students their belief in the students' potential and ability to succeed in college. They have a we are college bound focus, which is transformative for their community, made up of families with generational poverty. So posters and signs all over the school make this very clear. In fact, Each class has an adopted college or university, usually the college where their teacher graduated from. And the teacher teaches them the school song of that university, and they actually sing it regularly. And they have cheers from that university. So think of your grade 3 class, doing the UAA cheers of course, I will advertise Ateneo, right? So Ateneo. So one of their core values is we believe children can learn at high levels, regardless of their race, socioeconomic background, language, or family situation. So again, all over physical environment only, it is so clear. So look at this sign, it says, no excuses, absolutely no excuses. Violators will be engaged, challenged, and supported. In other words, if you're having a hard time, don't blame someone else. No, we will challenge you, but we will also engage you and support you. And so this is explained to the students, and it's all over the school. The principal and his faculty have translated their school mission into 6 powerful and easy to remember verbs. And I just put it there because you can't read it. But each of these posters in the first row is about the 6 verbs: think, learn, work, communicate, collaborate, and contribute. And under each of those 6 graphics, mini posters on the very first row, the teachers have put down strategies that they can use to help students learn to think, learn to learn to work, and so on. So on the right side, you can see that under think, they have prove it. They have the colorful one there with hexagons, is the design thinking process, and so on. So everything is very visible. Everything is very clear. The school's values and the culture they're trying to build is very clearly articulated to all stakeholders, including visitors. So this is a sheet they gave us that explains it. And when we were in that school, it was very clear that the things like this are not for accreditation purpose only, because you might say, meron din kaming ganyan, pero baka pang accreditation lang siya. Baka pang beginning of the year lang siya pag nire-review ninyo yung handbook ninyo. In this school, it's kept fully in use in every situation, every day, even for visitors. All classroom walls are filled with guides for students so they can work on their own, and so that all work to be done is clear to the students, so that they can work on their own agency, as well as evidence, pictures, and the student work posted all around the room. And they tell the story that these students are working together, that these students are happy, that they talk about their learning, and so on. So another pause for reflection. What beliefs about students do you personally, or maybe as a school, have about your students? What belief have that influences your expectations for students? Okay, so what are your beliefs about your students? And don't say this theoretically, because theoretically we all believe that our students can go far. But what belief in your students get enacted? For many teachers, it's, I believe my students can go far, but I also have lots of things to do and I can't work with each and every student. So I'm happy that my bright students do go far. Is this the expectation? If a visitor, there's a second prompt, if a visitor were to visit your school, would they see this in the environment, even if no one explained it to them? Right? So 10 seconds. Please reflect on this. The next 2 cultural forces are time and opportunities. Let me first explain time. Ron Richards says that we need to recognize time as a statement of values. We spend time on what matters to us. We prioritize what matters to us. We make time for what matters to us. And we don't build and spend all our energy making a schedule of just a lot of busy work that is not prioritized. So we manage energy, not time. Opportunities are vehicles for building culture. What opportunities do you give your students to build so that they build agency? Remember, one opportunity that we talked about was in the talk given by Mrs. Ladrido, and she said, when you give project-based learning, that's an opportunity for the students to carry out their leadership skills, their time management skills, and so on. So what opportunities do you give for building agency? So they are vehicles for building culture that serve either to constrain or lack of opportunities constrain, wrong opportunities constrain, or they may enhance the activity of individuals and the group and attend to opportunities to make products, but also opportunities for them to go through the process and think about the process of building learner agency. And this can be events in the school, this can be projects, this can be tasks, or these can just be teachable moments where you catch the student in the act of being proactive and you say, Anna, thank you for doing this for me. That was very agentic of you, right? So here are some examples. On the left is a schedule. On the right are the learning targets. The learning targets this is for one whole unit, so it may be maybe 2.5 weeks. And these are very carefully explained to the students. The students know what they need to, what they are responsible and accountable for. And so these are taken a few at a time. And for each day, the students know what they're supposed to finish for that day. So you have a daily schedule on the side that will serve as their guide. And because students know what they must learn by the end of that day, they are allowed to make choices about what task to do and when. So in the schedule, you can see that first they have breakfast. They have breakfast together, and this is sort of their, they eat, but they also, this is like their homeroom or class advisory time together, okay? Then here's PE. So this is non-negotiable. The whole class goes to the PE. And then they're given a choice. It's either typing club, those of you who are going to some typing activity or club, but also you can finish, and I can't read that word, but it's to finish some work that is ongoing. And then recess, and then they have a choice. So you either read The Tale of Despero, which is a book they're reading, or take the True Colors personality test, which I guess they need for some kind of formation program in their school. So choose, do you want to read the book or take the True Colors personality test? So remember, student voice and choice, this builds agency. It's very scaffolded. It's still very guided. They only have choices in certain parts of the class, but students are already starting to make choices. Then lunch, and then DIBELS, I don't know what that is. And then the last part says, choose either to go into circle, do your newsletter, or do your ticket to read. And all of this is very clearly explained to the students with work and directions all over the boards in their classroom. So they have the opportunities to be agentic. This is a picture of 3 ladies who planned our whole tour. The students feel they play a part in the success of the school. And so student guides proudly take charge of visitor tours. So these are the 3 ladies that planned our whole tour. They asked their principal, I heard them, the girl with the long hair and the gray shirt on the leftmost, she said to the principal, this was, by the way, the waiting room where, this is like our headquarters for the day. And so they came in, and the principal was talking to us. And she said to the principal, excuse me, should we go to the primary classrooms first? The principal answered, you're in charge. So they planned our whole tour. In fact, in this school, in a survey of student perceptions on student leadership, student perception that I am a leader in my school had a mean score of 4.32 out of 6 based on 336 students. So almost 4, a little more than 4 out of 6 students think they are a leader in their school. In fact, even in kindergarten, so each room has student ambassadors. So when we entered the kindergarten class, the teacher just said, who are our student ambassadors for today? And these 3 very shy boys stood up, and their job was to tour us around their classroom. They formally introduced themselves. They had practiced. So they shook our hands. They formally introduced themselves. They explained to us what their current project-based learning unit was, and they showed their visitors their PBL output and other student work around the room. So, another reflection. How are you allocating your time in such a way that you make time for what really matters? Remember, those 3 student guides were taken out of their class. They were allowed not to be in their class, right? So time is allowed for them to be leaders, right? So how are you allocating your time in such a way that you make time for what really matters? What kind of opportunities for agency can you create for instruction and school activities? 10 seconds. Okay, so the next 2 are interactions and routines. And interactions are just about how, the student to student and student to teacher, teacher to student, teacher to teacher, what kind of interactions happen in the school? Are they agentic? It's not just once in a while kind of interactions. What are the norms for interaction in the school? Are, like what I said about the guide, and the principal said, you're in charge. Does that kind of trusting relationship, but still respectful to authority, is that the norm? Are those the rules? Do your teachers know the students? Do you connect to students? Do you solicit feedback from the students? Because this school does. There are town halls, a lot of town halls. Ensure chances for all to participate and to be genuine about these relationships. And I'll give you some examples in a while. And routines. Routines are a set of shared practices that constitute a group's way of doing things. They become patterns of behavior for both individuals and the group, right? So I gave you in my talk last week a visible thinking routine. I see, I think, I wonder. And so just asking those 3 statements, it's a short but very efficient way to teach students to make inferences, right? I see, I think, I wonder. That's a routine. And you are very good at this, especially the primary school teachers here. You have routines for how to start a class. You have routines for how to move from one classroom to the other. These are excellent and these are important. But do you have routines that help build agency, right? So in this school, students can explain what they're doing, how, and why. You can just enter the classroom and they can explain to you, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. And that's where the routines come in. Because otherwise, they cannot explain to you the way they usually do things. Those 3 kindergarten boys explain to us, we are now at the end of the unit, and at this time, this is what we do, because everything is a routine. So the grade 5 and 6 students can even explain how the teacher monitors their progress and how the teacher has designed their movement forward throughout the unit. So even as young as 3, 4 kinder, they do this with pride in the work they do. They work collaboratively in teams, meaning everyone is responsible for and accountable for the output of their group. So when they have a team, in fact, in Ron Berger School, they don't call themselves teams. They call themselves crew. We are a crew, you know, the McDo crew, the Jollibee crew, working together to come up with a certain output. So one of their routines is the need to know questions, and the teacher collects what are the questions so that you can do this project. What do you need to know? So one of their routines is your questions are important to us. So let's generate your questions and we will make sure we answer all your questions sometime throughout the unit. So in this section, you can see, as I said, that what they have to do is very clear. In the middle picture, the deliverables are there. It's listed. They know these are the things they are responsible for. On the right side, there is an anchor chart on who are paleontologists, because this unit is about dinosaurs. And this were if you look at the one on the right, it even says a paleontologist is a person who studies fossils, page 16. The third bullet point is a paleontologist. When they find a fossil, they patiently dig it out, page 20. So the students don't have to keep asking teacher. They can work on their own, but the teacher is always there. And the schedule is on the leftmost picture. So again, quickly, what relationships and interactions, teacher, student, 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 lay the foundation for agency to grow in your school? What routines and protocols to nurture agency, to monitor student agency, to further enhance student agency so that they become leaders? What are these routines and protocols that exist in your classroom and school? Another 10 seconds. The last two are modeling and language. And modeling is about implicit and explicit kinds of modeling. Implicit meaning you're not, it's not like think aloud where you're modeling, this is how you do it, right? A lot of the implicit modeling is in the charts around the room. This is how you do it. These are the instructions, graphic organizers, and so on. Or just teacher modeling, that's implicit too. You're not saying, look, this is how you should be agentic, right? No, you're just being agentic or being excellent and making the students, catch it from the way you're acting. So it can be implicit and explicit modeling towards independence, towards agency via a range of practices. So it could be instructional modeling. For example, if you teach them and start modeling how to set a goal and how to follow the rubric to record progress against a learning goal. It can be dispositional, which is just your own person, you're witnessing. It can be cognitive, and cognitive is like how to think, how to become agentic, how to use the rubrics to become agentic. I'm sorry, I forgot the page number there. But this is from the book, Creating Cultures of Thinking. So the students are watching. The students are watching. And so modeling is very important. Language is about the words and structures that we use, the structures that make up language. And these not only convey an explicit surface meaning, but also impart a set of deeper associations and connections that implicitly shape thought and influence behavior. And I will be speaking a lot more about language later on. But language, the language that we use with students, enables them, helps them grow. It can also hurt them, scar them, wound them. So we have to be very careful about what language we use. And the question here is, what is language that builds agency? In this next picture that we took in Catherine Smith, you can see that they tell their students to be kind, be safe, but they talk about what it means. I can be safe, and they elicit, don't run in class, walk to line up, etc. And then they ask students to fill up the statement, I am safe because in this school, and all those orange post-its are what they do, right? So they are modeling it. They're not just saying we have to be safe in the school. They're modeling it, and they're using language to do it. In fact, because they're very clear about what the goals for each class are, they also use language and modeling. A new development when we went there was that after their learning targets, they always add so that. Okay, so they tell their students. So if it's like I can add fractions with different denominators, so that what? They teach their students to fill it up, right? So I must be safe. I must not run in class, so that. And this is the language that helps their students know why it's important, helps them in decision making later on, helps them in agency. They also use a lot of language, we or us, because they're trying to teach their students that we need to have collective agency. Remember, Dr. Martin talked about collective agency. And in fact, because they're very clear about what the goals for each class are and what their own personal learning goals are, the school is able to adopt the student-led conferences model. And here in PTC, instead of the teacher talking to the parent about why your daughter or son got this grade, it is the student telling the parents, these were my learning targets. And mom, I am already near this learning target. Look, here's the work I did. Or mom, I'm having a hard time with this learning target, but next unit, I'm going to work with teacher to get this done. So agentic modeling, agentic language, right? So we have now the 8 cultural forces. And my reflection to you before I go into the language of agency, which is the last part of this webinar. Very important reflection. So did your students get your memo? What was in your memo in the first place? What kind of culture were you trying to build? And did your students get the memo? And which of those 8 cultural forces did you most use so that the students will get the memo that this is the kind of culture you want to build? The other question is, which one of these 8 cultural forces do you think you can use more? Do you think you can gain maximum benefit from that maybe you're not yet using enough? So another 10 seconds. Okay, so we're nearing the end of the webinar, and I just need a few minutes more to talk about a possible entry point. Remember, the entry point of Ron Berger was beautiful student work so that they would learn what excellence is. To learn what agency is, one of the entry points that we can use is the cultural force of language, right? So I'd like to give you 10 things to say very often to the students. And I'm saying it's hacking agency because it's shortcut, very efficient, very easy for a teacher to do. I'm not going, it doesn't involve, you have to put new things in your unit. You have to make new visual aids. No, it's something easy to do because they're just statements that you should use often. So in a way, it's like a life hack of sorts. Lee Watanabe Crockett, in his book Future Focused Learning, calls it micro shifts, meaning it's a shift that's just small. You can call it baby steps. You can call it low hanging fruit. And so that's sort of my baon for you as we end this seminar. So it's 10 things to say very often. Okay, so one is just hi, but use the name, right? Use their names. How are you, Galvin? Hi, Galvin, okay? Because this builds relational trust, which we talked about in the webinar of Mrs. Ching and Dr. Cara Fernandez. Without this foundation of trust and respect, agency cannot grow. The students need to feel that they are recognized. Kasali ka. You belong to this class. This is a class and we're all expected to learn at magtutulong-tulungan tayo. So you're telling the students with just this kind of always saying as often as you can, hi and how are you, but with a name. This is an atmosphere of safety and joy. It's okay to be yourself. It's okay to have strengths and weaknesses also. It's okay to be different from the others. You belong. It's also the way that the student can start to build identity. Sino ba talaga ako? How can I be true to myself? I need to know first who I am, and I need to feel that people accept who I am. Many of us don't know who we are, even up to now, because in the past, so many people, society, community, authorities, parents, elders, they all told us who we should be. And the message we got is you're only valuable if you conform to this societal picture. So conform. In other words, don't be yourself. So, this is very important. So imagine it's a hack. All you have to do is say, hi, and how are you? But use the students' names. This is a picture from Katie Martin in the ACON, those of you that attended. And it's an attempt for the whole community to get to know Juan and Brianna and Omar and Alexis and their strengths are their interests, abilities. Maybe this is in the faculty room. How nice that would be. Next, this is worth noting or celebrating, right? So a student can show you work, not necessarily big, hindi kailangang obra maestra, but work done well or reaching a goal, and you say, hey, this is worth noting, celebrating. Class, Anna was able to add fractions without denominators. Look what she did. And so this is worth celebrating. So maybe not saying it in those exact words. You can say you did it, but use the language of celebrating even very small achievements. And this will help develop self-efficacy and motivation. In a school in the States, Carmen High School attached to Alverno College, there's a bulletin board in public, in the hallway, where everybody can see. Every child's name is there. Per grade level, there's that board. And every time something notable is done by the child, in even the smallest way, the teachers stick a post-it, a sticky note to that child's name. So you're going to see that bulletin board. It's changed about every 3 or 4 weeks. By the time it gets to the 3rd week, it's full. Every student has a lot of sticky notes. And apparently the teachers, if there's a student with much less than the others, they talk to each other. Help that girl, help that boy, so that by the end of next week, we need to add more sticky notes to that boy. Imagine that culture. Third, we need to use vocabulary to help them visualize what they can be and get them used to picturing themselves aiming high. Remember, Catherine Smith, we are college bound, right? So teachers can start, the math teachers can start the class. Hello, mathematicians. We're here again today to do work that mathematicians do. Or an English teacher who will say, because we are authors, we are now going to do the editing part of our essay and so on. So, authors do this and so on. So get them used to that. This helps build self-efficacy, motivation, and gives them a future orientation. And in fact, remember this, I showed this to you last week. It's the sentence starters. We were talking about scaffolding, explaining my thinking in math. You can say, remember, there's mathematicians. Don't forget, we have our anchor chart. And so use the language that mathematicians use, which is there on our anchor chart, right? So I've given you the first three statements or questions to use very often with your students. Hi or how are you, plus the name. Celebrate the work of the students. Ron Richard, by the way, these 10 things to say every day is also based on a session I attended with Ron Richard during the Harvard Project Zero. And his language hack is just one word, it's wow. Say wow a lot to your students, right? So these three statements are all part of this. This graphic is very familiar to you, right? It's the webinar series framework for for learner agency. And it's that first one, the believing you can, believing in yourself. So the first three language hacks were for believing in myself. Number 4, what are your goals? And what is your stretch goal? And this helps goal setting and future orientation. It's nice to introduce the phrase stretch goals to your students because it means don't choose a goal that's so easy for you. Stretch yourself. And in one preschool, this was done. The students are supposed to choose a stretch goal. So even if one of the stretch goals of the students was, I will wait for my turn going down the stairs instead of pushing other children. That's a stretch goal for that boy. And so they share their stretch goals at the beginning of the week. And on Friday, before they end, the teacher just says, who reached their stretch goal, and do you want to tell us stories about it? And related to this is, how are you doing with your goals? So you can say, what did you do well? You know already, this is the metacognitive process, right? But let me share just quickly, what is your homeroom class for? What is your class advisory for? It would be nice if, like in Ron Berger's school, this is the time to say hi to your students, share stories very quickly, maybe today one girl, tomorrow another boy, etc. Share stories about their home life or just about anything that's not related to school. Set the clear goals for the day, review the previous day's highlights, teach any routines needed, but also review progress and celebrate failures towards stretch goals. In fact, in the kinder class, the teacher asks, how many students were able to reach their stretch goal? How many students failed? And she says it with a smile and so welcoming. And that brings us to our number 5 statement. How did we fail well today? So this is something you can teach your students. It's okay to fail. So you can say fail well means, okay, you can feel bad, but you get up and learn from it. Or, talk about what fail well means. And make a bulletin board of how I failed well today. And students can put Post-its there. And this develops growth mindset, grit, persistence, how to rise from failure. Number 6 statement is, how do I learn best? I'd like to add to the things, we're still talking about monitoring progress, setting goals, failing well. But amidst all of that, your students should also start to learn self-knowledge. Okay. This is, you know, I don't like fractions, but when I am faced with a subject I don't like or a topic I don't like, this is what works for me. That's very agentic because they need this so that they can cope with difficulties, especially learning difficulties, as they get older and older. So these next four statements, we have three statements now under believing in myself, and then I've shared with you four statements under having intention and a sense of purpose, and then quickly just the last four statements on being equipped to learn. So what do we do when we're stuck? Remember, your students are learning alone at home, hopefully with a more knowledgeable other, but maybe not. So what do we do when we're stuck? And this develops cognitive flexibility, digital literacy, study skills, many other important benefits. And I know you're familiar with this concept of try three before me, but this is something, for example, that you can teach your students. What do you do when you're stuck? So you have three steps: think, think, think again. What are the directions the teacher explained? Read the directions again. Underline the word in the direction you don't know. Okay? And then look, what are the others doing? Is there an example that teacher posted? And last, ask your table for help. So try three before asking mama or teacher or the more knowledgeable other, what do I do? So that the student is not used to always, what do? I don't know what to do. And so you're building agency here. The next one is talk to me about what you're doing. And this is to teach the students to think through their process. Teaching them that kailangan may plano sila, di ba? Hindi pwedeng laging may model and then you'll just copy it. You also have to have a plan, right? So you can ask things like, ano bang gusto mong mangyari sa math problem, right? Why did you choose this strategy? What are you trying to do? What do you want to happen? What is your plan? What do you think went wrong? So don't give the answer. Don't give your answer. They might have another answer. It might be just as good or better. Resist the urge. Remember, you're not the only expert in the room. You are developing other experts in the room, and hopefully these are your students, right? I'd like to remind you about the learning pit. This was shared by Katie Martin in the last ACON. This is by James Nottingham, and in a talk I heard by him, he talks about the learning pit, and there's really a pit, and the students will really go down that pit before they learn. So in that pit is when they get confused, they start having questions, they start having many ideas, and they don't even know which one is correct, etc. And then to start climbing out of their learning pit, they make connections. And he also tells us how what they should do. Be taught. We can teach them what to do when they're stuck, what to do when they're in the bottom of the pit, how to get out of the pit, and so on. Number 9 is give them feedback, but we make the mistake of our feedback being what should be done. I attended a session with some college teachers sharing how they give feedback to other teachers about unit design, course design. And the supervisors tell them what to do. You should do this. And instead, feedback should be, I noticed that you did this, you know, because what you're hinting to them is, yun ba ang gusto mong mangyari? Yun ba talaga ang balak mo? Right? It seems to me that you didn't describe the character enough so that the student will be the one to think of their own solution. And the last one is, let's slow down. Let's step back and look at the big picture. And this is teaching your students about incremental wins. You know, we do this little by little. Don't try to do everything. This is time and project management skills. This is stress and anxiety management, coping skills. And so teach your students, oh, sige, break muna tayo. Or, okay, let's take 10 more minutes to think about this, because not everyone is finished, right? So this is for the last, being equipped with tools, skills, and strategies to learn. So I've given you 10 language hacks that hopefully will address the different facets of learner agency. And I hope that we remember that the culture is very important. The culture is our co-teacher. Culture matters. And remember the saying of, we don't want to give them the fish, but we want to teach them how to fish. So hopefully these language hacks will be an easy way to do it. Okay, I hope that helped. And we have time now, I think, for a few questions.
Thank you so much, Miss Rita. That was a lot. I took a lot of notes.
That was a lot. Sorry,
but that was great. I mean, I can really see how the session today begins to bring together the several sessions in the past few Saturdays, right? And I didn't really get to watch everything, but just making connections between the other webinars, I can begin to see how today's session really reminds us of how we can actually make learner agency happen by taking a step back and looking at culture. And we don't really talk about culture a lot. I think we need to talk about culture a little more, but I think today was a good step forward. So I hope that you were able to catch your breath for a few seconds, Ms. Rita, but I hope you're ready for some questions. So we have some questions that have been raised in our chat. If you haven't raised your questions yet, if there's something that you'd like to ask Ms. Rita, please continue to do so over the Facebook comments. So let me just go straight to one of the questions raised by Ms. Shiksha Sharma. The question is very specific to something you mentioned earlier about explicit modeling. So maybe she's just asking for, like, what's a simple way of understanding what explicit modeling is?
For me, the simplest is the think aloud modeling. And we need to use it always as one of the first steps when we give direct instruction, when we introduce a new topic. So think aloud. Well, if you're a reading teacher, there'll be read aloud modeling. And it's including reading aloud and helping your students comprehend. So it's much like what I did. I showed you the excerpt of the book. It's the author's words. And then I think it through. I think through the comprehension of, Ron Berger said, craftsman, he is, stressing this and that. And so you're helping them to comprehend the package. But you can use think aloud modeling even for the other subjects. Math teachers use it a lot. So it's like how to add maybe a 3-digit number with another 3-digit number. And you say, oh, where should I start? I'll start with the units place. And I'll add 8 and 3, the 2 numbers in the units place. And the answer is 11, which is 110 and 1 unit. So the 110 will go with the tens place. And you're writing it on the board and you're thinking aloud about the process. And that's explicit modeling. The other thing is, if it's about agency, let's say, and you can tell your students, let's say the students say, remember I had a slide where I forgot the page number, and the student, and so you can model. I'm so sorry, I forgot, say, I'm sorry, I forgot to, and so you're modeling how to fail. So things like that. Although my last example could also be thought of as implicit modeling, but graphic organizers, and then you can go through each one and say how to fill up. It says here main idea. How do I know the main idea? Maybe I'll underline a word that's often said, or so you think it through, and that's the modeling.
Thanks, Ms. Rita. While you were answering the question, I also remembered one of the last points that you mentioned about not giving out the answer right away. Like, can this be an alternative to that? Like, instead of giving the answer right away, maybe model how to get to the answer.
Yes, correct. Thank you for pointing that out. And in fact, the questions, if you ask questions like, so if the student doesn't know how to get the main idea, then you can say, what would be some ways that you would know how to get the main idea? What do you think? And then have a conversation with the students and model the process of thinking it through.
Thank you, Ms. Rita. So I'll move on to the next question. The questions are not very related to each other, but they're very interesting because I think this is where our participants today are coming from. The second question is from Erico Kibus. I hope I pronounced that correctly. His question is, how can we eradicate the culture of competition in the classroom? This question came up when you were talking about that example wherein the students were encouraged to help each other with the post-its, like how can we help this person have more post-its there? And maybe this teacher was thinking about, but a more prevalent culture is, excuse me, using boards to actually compete to each other, diba? For students to compete with each other. So how do we reconcile that?
Yes, Galvin had a good suggestion. That's one answer. But also, you need to remove some structures, because there are some structures that tell the story that competition is important, and you need to, so for example, the awards, maybe remove awards. Are you willing to be that radical? If you remove awards and instead recognize all the little achievements of students, that's going to already radically change the way it's done. In Xavier School, if I'm not mistaken, Galvin, some awards were removed for the younger grades. And I think it's Xavier School, if I'm not mistaken. And I think it was very much appreciated. It just removed the pressure from parents, students, teachers. And it just signaled that everybody should achieve. Everyone is an achiever, and we must recognize the achievements of everyone. So there are different ways to do it. And I can't give you specific ways because they it depend a lot on the context of your school. But I would love to use, if I were teaching culture in one of my education classes, I would love to use your question, sir, as my task for my ed students, right, Galvin? Because I would say use the 8 forces and tell me how you would eradicate a culture of competition.
Thanks, Ms. Rita. So Ms. Rita was actually my teacher in one of those grad courses. And one thing that I remembered while you were answering the question was, I remember you asking us to read this article by Alficon about praise. And basically the point was to be very clear what you're praising, right? That the, let's say, what the student was able to achieve, and being able to identify that, basically from Alficon's perspective, was more important than just, let's say, a star or a number that you actually give. So what the number or what the star represents is important to mention. And that came to mind while you were sharing your answer.
Thank you for remembering that, Galvin. It's a book called Punished by Rewards by Alficon. And he really says you get punished by rewards. So every time, like, the first time you get, let's say you became number 1 in your class for this school year. imagine the pressure you're in now for next school year. You're going to get pressure from all sides. Suddenly, learning it removed the joy of learning. Every time you get rewards like that, it removes some of the joy, intrinsic joy in just doing the task, and you add more and more extrinsic rewards. So it's pressure.
I really like that perspective, because I think it's really an invitation for us to rethink, as you've been mentioning in this webinar, what kind of culture we're fostering in our classes and in our schools, right? Like, are we fostering a culture of competition, or are we fostering a culture of achievement? And as you use in the earlier example of excellence, right? So I think if we're clear with that, all of these things will fall into place, of course, with much practice.
And they're all related to agency, Galvin, right? Because when you start achieving, agency is all about what do I want to achieve, based on knowing who I am and what my goals are. And so, excellence, achievement, learning, it's all related to agency.
So I'll just ask one more question. I know we've gone for more than an hour, or close to 2 hours already, but I think this is an interesting question from Noemi Formaran. I'm not so sure if she's from higher ed, but the language gives me some clues. Her question is, what advice can you give to marry student agency or learner agency with outcomes-based education, since OBE is very much something that is top of mind right now, most especially in higher ed institutions?
Well, if you look at the example of the learning targets that I gave, you can think of that as outcomes-based education. I would say include some agentic behavior when you identify the program learning outcomes and the course learning outcomes for your specific course or program. But also be very careful about the alignment. If you can make your assessment system and if possible, also the grading system, such that the student has to demonstrate proficiency in each of those outcomes, like maybe come up with a student portfolio or capstone that does this, then that way you are marrying achievement of goals with which is related to agency, because students have to be able to do it independently. If you can give them choices as to how they demonstrate it and so on, but based on the course learning outcomes and program learning outcomes.
Thanks, Ms. Rita. Maybe just to close our Q&A, I'll throw in one of the questions that I thought about while listening to you. Also, as inspired by some of the comments in our Facebook feed. There were lots of comments a while ago saying that they remember their role as a class advisor, they miss being a class advisor. So I guess a question that came to mind was, so is building this kind of culture of student agency really just the role of the class advisor? Kumbaga, when you think about the school, the question is, whose role is it to build this kind of culture?
Thank you for asking this question, because then it's a good way to recap the talk. If you feel you are, as a subject teacher only, let's say, that you are not responsible for agency, then that's going to come across, right? If you look at the 8 cultural forces, it's not in your expectations of the students. It for sure will not be in your environment, because you won't think about how to, let's say, put math sentence starters. You won't think about, it won't be in your language. You won't call your students, hi, mathematicians, because it's like, why am I doing that? I'm not, I'm only responsible for delivering the content. So it won't happen. And it likely won't happen in your school, because it takes a village and that's what that common saying refers to, it takes a village to educate a child, is about classroom and school culture. It has to be in the culture. So in fact, maybe the way to think about it is it's not the class advisors only who are responsible for developing something like agency, which cuts across, which is a life skill rather than a subject skill. But it is enacted in everything that happens in school, including and especially the subjects, because otherwise the students will learn that everything is compartmentalized. There's something for formation and there's something for subject, and they won't learn to put things together. So instead of thinking that it's only the class advisors who are responsible for things, life skills like agency, maybe we should start thinking that I'm not only a subject teacher. I'm always a subject teacher and a class advisor built in there. So something like that might help.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rita. I think that's been a lot. And I'm very sure that if you were like me listening to the webinar today, there were lots of questions that came to mind, questions about how to actually do this in my classroom, and then thinking of strategies already on what you will actually do. So I hope that today was helpful for everyone. Maybe just to close today's session, allow me just to share just 3 key points that I took away from today's webinar from Ms. Rita. The first key idea is something that she actually mentioned in her last slide, that culture is my co-teacher. That's one of the things that struck me, because if you really think about it, culture can actually create many teachers in the classroom, right? So if even your students can become co-teachers of culture. So if there are habits, there are things
I will borrow that.
So even if it doesn't come from, sometimes if the culture is already set up, then it will be more organic, no? And I guess that also goes to the second takeaway that I got from today, that I think it's important to make the culture transparent, because I think that I don't think this is something very new to us. I think we talk about this a lot in many different avenues, but a lot of them are present in our plans, right? I remember in ASCO accreditations or things like that, we have these wonderful documents that really talk about these things that we intend to happen in our classrooms, in our schools. But how transparent are they? And that's one of the things that challenged my thinking today. When we talk about transparency, it's not just transparency among the administrators and the teachers, but also transparency to the students. No? Na parang kita ba ng students yung culture? Ramdam ba nila? Ramdam ba ng parents? Diba? I like what you mentioned, that if someone steps into your classroom, how does it feel like? No? What is the aura? What is the vibe that they get? And I think it begins with that transparency. No? So making it explicit from the beginning. And finally, I just want to say that I found the last part very helpful, because again, it's not just about plans, it's about making it happen and finding entry points, what you mentioned, finding micro shifts, small things that you can do, like saying wow a lot more, addressing your students by name. Those things, I think, are pretty fundamental to anything that we will do as teachers. So I really learned a lot today. Thank you so much, Ms. Rita. And I'm sure that for the participants who's joined us for the past few webinars, today was a really good way to put things together and to really begin to think of how to make this happen in our classrooms and in our schools. So on behalf of those who listened in today and Rex Education and the Ateneo SALT Institute, thank you, Ms. Rita, for spending some time with us and sharing with us your insights and your tips, very concrete tips that we can actually use. We'd also want to thank our audience, most especially those who's been joining us in the past few Saturdays. We know that Saturdays are precious to us for family, for your own me time. But I hope that as you join the webinars, it's also enriched yourselves, no? your own professional development as teachers. I just want to remind everyone that the recording of today's video can be found at the Rex Bookstore Facebook page and on the Ateneo SALT Facebook page. We will post them as soon as they're available. The instructions for the e-certificate can also be found on the REX page. So in the comment section, the REX team will be posting some instructions on how to actually evaluate your participation in today's webinar and how to claim a certificate for it. Finally, I'd like to invite you to the next webinar, which will happen 2 weeks from now. So not next week, because next Saturday is Labor Day. So everybody deserves a rest, including you, our audience. So 2 Saturdays from now, we'll see you again for another webinar. And I will be there as well. So you will see me again in that webinar because I will be the one. It's my turn to share with you some things that hopefully will be helpful in your classrooms and in your schools. So thank you very much. We would like to just thank everyone for being here, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your weekend.